Hi, I'm Tricia Morris from Club Scrap and welcome to the show. Now I have a confession to make. Even though I'm the co-owner of Club Scrap, I've never really taken a formal art class. I was actually a piano performance major in college. But I guess it's never really stopped me from wanting to play with all the same toys and all the same tools that professional artists play with. So today I want to share with you the results of hours of playtime in my studio, and we're going to have a lot of fun together. Well, today I just want to show you a ton of different techniques that I discovered, and what I like about them is that I can use these techniques with supplies I already have, like rubber stamps and papers, and I'm also going to be using my tool of choice today, watercolor pencils. So let's get started. I'll show you a technique, and I'll show you how I've made it into something beautiful. All right, the first one, I'm starting with just a piece of nice ivory colored cardstock. This is from Club Scrap's A Study in Red collection. We combined some reds and some beautiful flannel grays. And I'm also using a stamp. This is from the Club Scrap From the Heart kit. And it just has such a nice verse on it. I'm going to go ahead and ink this stamp with a kind of a special ink formulated just for working with watercolor pencils. It's called India ink, and this is from Stewart Superior. It really dries quickly, so there's no waiting time from when you stamp it to when you want to color it with the pencils and then add water. If you were to use a regular dye-based ink here and then come back with watercolor pencils and then water, the ink would smear. All right, and there's my beautiful image. Now the next thing I need is my Faber-Castell watercolor pencil, and these are from their inspiration kits from their Creative Studio line, and these watercolor pencils are really nice. They're triangular shaped, and they also have a soft grip. If I were to drop this, the pencil won't go rolling off the table and landing on the floor, which is something you really don't want to happen. And so I'm going to start out by coloring this heart. Now as I mentioned before, without an art background, a stamp designer can sometimes give you a lot of leadership as to where you can apply color. So notice I'm just adding this red color to the areas that already have some shading. And that's going to look really nice when I finish that with some water. And then I'll add a second blue color to the winged areas. And you know, this is a very traditional way to watercolor. What's nice about it as a non-drawing person to utilize the rubber stamps that we already have to make them beautiful with the watercolors. Okay, now that I have that somewhat colored in, and you don't have to take a lot of time to do that, I'm going to take one of the brushes that comes in the inspiration kit, and I need a little bit of water here as well. So working on a non-stick craft sheet, I'll just spray some water onto the sheet. And then I'm going to start it with the lightest color first, dip the brush in the water, and then just come and start to spread and blend the colors. Okay, now in between colors, you might want to just dab your brush off. If you're going from a light to a dark, though, sometimes it's not as important. But then I'm just going to finish by spreading the color all around on the heart. And this really doesn't take much time at all, and I just love that effect. Very artsy. All right, the next thing I want to do is add a nice splatter effect to this card. So I'm going to take a little bit of a darker blue and some more moisture from my craft sheet and just pick up the color from the tip of the watercolor pencil with my wet brush. And you have to make sure that you have enough color, then hold the brush in your non-dominant hand, in my case it's my left hand, and then tap it from the top with your dominant hand, and it's going to just give you a nice little splatter effect, just like paint. So I've just turned my watercolor into another tool, and depending on how many colors you have a whole palette that you can use to accent your projects. Okay, I'm going to clean off my brush, and then the next thing I'm going to do is just tear the edges. So now I want to add some color to the edge of my torn piece here, and for that I'm going to go to my tin of 24 colors, and you can start out with an inspiration kit with just a few, but if you really want to dive in, this is the way to do it. Love these. Okay, so now I think I'm going to use the black to add this edging. To get the pencil out of the tin, you just tip on the bottom end and grab it from the top, and you're ready to go. And I've got all this moisture here on my craft sheet. Just by taking the tip of my pencil, I'm going to color into the water, and all the color is transferred from the tip of the pencil to my craft sheet. Next, I can just take my torn edge, which is now more porous. It's going to absorb the water more easily, and I'm just going to soak up all that color, all that pigment, right into my piece. And then, it might be a little shocking to look at it at first. It's really dark. Don't panic, these are watercolors. They're soft, and if I just take my towel and just clean away some of the ink, it softens it up and really creates kind of a neat aged effect. Now imagine, I have the capability of doing this with every single color that I have in the set. All right, now this is pretty much done. If I just layer it with a couple of beautiful club scrap papers, I have a really fun card. This happens to be a die cut piece. Love the way this card turned out. And that was 3 techniques right there. Coloring directly, and then the splatter, and then the torn edge. I've got some more to show you, so let's move on to the next one. Now for our next technique, we're going to be using a club scrap stencil. This is from the A Study in Red kit. And I love this large, bold image. It's perfect for what we're going to be doing with this technique. The next thing I'm going to do is moisten the stencil with some water. You know, a lot of people say, how much water do I use? You want to make sure you have enough to activate the pigment of the watercolor pencil, but not so much that it's pooling up. I'm working with black again because it's going to coordinate well with my project. And with the side of my pencil, almost in the same way that you saw me do it earlier on the craft sheet, I'm going to color the stencil. Notice I'm not coloring the spaces in the openings of the stencil. I'm laying color down on top of the stencil itself rather than coloring into the openings. It's a different concept. Now, let me just say this. If you run into a situation where all you're getting are strong, hard pencil marks, you don't have enough water. If nothing is happening, just add more water. Do you see how all the color is just laying on top there? And once you're satisfied with the amount of color that you have, taking another sheet of that nice smooth ivory cardstock, and I'm just going to lay it on top of this image and then burnish it. And while I'm doing that, I just want to say that if you have words that you want trying to pick up, make sure you place the stencil backwards on your craft sheet so that when you pick it up, the words will be facing the correct direction. All right, and now there I have my image, and it's actually the reverse of the image, and I'll heat that with the heat tool. All right, now that that's dry, I just want to show you a quick tip about cleaning up after you do something like this. Here's how you should approach this. Just clean the top of the stencil, which probably has most of the color present, then lift it up, and then wipe the craft sheet underneath it clean. You can use any kind of a non-porous surface for this technique, and then go ahead and wipe the back of the stencil. If you need to repeat that, you can, but at least that way your stencil and your work surface will be clean. Okay, now let's set that aside. I want to show you a couple more things we can do with this. If you take the same coordinating color of watercolor pencil and then just go along the very edge, notice how I'm almost bringing the tip of the pencil onto the craft sheet rather than the edge of the paper. It lines itself up very easily if you do this, and because of the strength of these leads, this kind of technique holds up really surprisingly well. At this point now I can take a wet brush, in this case I'm using a water brush, and you just run along the edge, and what it's going to do is just draw that color out onto the card. Now you can do this with a scrapbook page or with a card, panel, embellishment, really anything that you want. Even if it's a pre-printed tag, you can alter it with your watercolors. Now, the next thing that we can do, because we'll continue on, is incorporate our India ink once again with a coordinating image. I've got a tiny little version of the same image on this rubber stamp. I've inked it with the India ink, making it a permanent image. And now when I stamp it, even if my surface is still slightly wet, the ink will not be affected by the moisture. Got a nice, clean, crisp image here that matches with what I'm doing. And I can also pick up some color with the tip of my water brush, and I can splatter that. You see how all these techniques really work well and transfer well together. And then this can be added to a card, it can be added to a page, anything you can think of that you might need this fun, funky embellishment. And here you can see it on a card. I've also incorporated the original technique of just coloring with the India ink to make these custom ribbon slides for the bottom of my card, and I've combined that with a stamped image. Turned out really neat. I've got more to show you, so let's get going on our next technique. Now this next project is a direct to stamp technique, and this is really fun. We're going to mist the stamp with water, and if it has too much water, the ink will be very runny and your image will be nondescript. And if you don't have enough water, nothing's going to happen when you add color. Working with number 192 here, and I'm just going to take the edge of the watercolor pencil, because if I work from the top, it just doesn't cover as much surface area as quickly. And I've got just about the right amount of water here. You can see how the color pigment is just pooling up on top of the stamp, but it's not really overflowing with color. Okay, once I get the main image colored in with this one, number 192. I'll add my classic 199 black. Oh, love how rich that is. With the fine-tipped pencils, you really have a lot of freedom in detail for more detailed stamps if you want to add the color to the stamp rather than to color to a stamped image. It's a lot of fun to do this. And I'm just kind of adding a little bit here and there. Okay, let's give this a whirl. We're going to stamp right onto our ivory cardstock once again. Beautiful. Love that. Okay, now I've cleaned my stamp a little bit, and you can come back, and do you see how the color is pooling here a little bit on top of the image? Just blend it in. And it really has a unique effect. I mean, this is something I don't believe can really be achieved any other way than coloring onto the stamp in the way that we did. And I love the effect. All those colors can be blended until to your heart's content. Okay, you can of course splatter and spackle and have a lot of fun tearing edges and soaking up the ink, but let me show you how neat this card looks with the other red papers from that Study in Red kit. Just had a little ribbon around there, added another little image, and a coordinating image around the side here. Turned out really neat. I've got one more cool technique that I want to share, so bear with me. It's a quick one. It's the same technique you just saw. Same stamp you just saw, but this time I used the white. Now I don't know about you, but I have watercolor pencils here, and I've got that white color, and it's a color you don't really use very often because it doesn't show up on white paper. So I thought maybe if I play around with this, I can get the white to work on a darker colored paper, and lo and behold, I thought it turned out into like a faux bleach technique. Now, I like to stamp in bleach, but sometimes you don't want to risk getting it on your clothing. It's watercolor, but you might not think so at first glance. And to that, I want to add kind of a fun spackle using that white. This is number 101 white. Check this out. I'm going to take the tip of my wet brush here and kind of go back and forth over the tip of the pencil. And you can see just a fine, fine splatter coming off the tip there. Kind of continuing with that spackling look we achieved earlier, but this is a much more fine dot. So even by different techniques, using the tip of all of these pencils, there's a whole world of options there that we can use. I mean, you kind of just want to keep going, but I won't do that anymore. I did that at home. Here is the finished card. I did the edges and spackled it, faux bleach. It's a great look, and I love how using this technique doesn't alter the pH content of your paper. Now, once you've really used these watercolor pencils in the ways I've shown you, just grab a sharpener that comes in one of those inspiration kits and just clean them up, and they'll be all fresh and ready to go in your tin. And if you're like me, I do like to have them back in the manufacturer's suggested order. So just go ahead and number them chronologically from 101 to 199, and you'll be all set to go for the next round. Okay, well, I just want to say this and remind you of this, that you can't be afraid to make something and then say, that didn't work. Because you know what? A bunch of my stuff ended up in the circular file, if you know what I mean. So just don't be afraid to give this a try. Experiment with these techniques, create some of your own, and have a great time. I'll see you on the next show.
For step-by-step instructions on how to create this week's project, download the design guide featuring special make-it-your-own bonus tips.